Welcome into Weather Wednesday here at New England Storm Center. Well, what happened yesterday afternoon certainly changed up this week's Weather Wednesday agenda a bit. I make the agenda of what I'm going to talk about usually Tuesday morning or Tuesday afternoon. And of course, yesterday afternoon, a major flash flooding event began across Connecticut and Rhode Island. It began around midday. The flooding hit both the Hartford and Providence metro areas very hard. A line of very heavy thunderstorms began to move southward through the area, like I said, around midday. The line of storms stretched from the Connecticut border all the way over to the south shore of Massachusetts. Now, the storms began to train, which means you have multiple storms going over the same areas over and over and over again. Both the Hartford and Providence metro areas saw upwards of 3 inches of rain during the event. This is in addition to the 3 to 6+ inches of rain that have fallen over the past few days in both Connecticut and Rhode Island. Just after 1 p.m., the National Weather Service released a flash flood statement. In that statement, they wrote, quote, "Trained weather spotters reported thunderstorms producing heavy rain. There is significant flooding in the Hartford metropolitan area right now. Several cars are stuck in flooding on Scarborough Street, and the road is being closed due to the flooding. There are also other streets where cars are stuck in street flooding in the Hartford area. Between 3 and 6 inches of rain have fallen in the past 48 hours, end quote. So the flooding that came out of Hartford and really all of Connecticut did show some pretty bad flash flooding occurring. The West Hartford Fire Department said that they had to respond to several vehicles stuck in flash flooding. The rain came on very suddenly. There was really nothing motorists could do at when they were out there. Of course, flash flooding, it happens in a flash, and all of a sudden you are just surrounded by water. The pouring rain is just blinding, and many people caught up in those flash floods. There were no injuries, thankfully, reported with the flooding. Hartford was not the only city that was hit. Significant flooding was also reported in Stafford, Connecticut, with nearly a foot of water reported over an intersection in that city. Similar scenes did play out in Providence, Rhode Island, as again, sudden and prolonged downpours stranded motorists across that city and forced many roads to be shut down across the Providence metro area. A kayaker was filmed on the Pleasant Valley Parkway in the city, which was reported to have several feet of water running over it. May Street in the city was reported to have over 2 feet of water running over it. A snowplow was seen clearing water from the streets, breaking up the snowplows in July. Of course, all of this happening on the 4th of July holiday. People generally were making the most out of it, out of these flash floods, but certainly a scary situation playing out there. Of course, these storms being thunderstorms, being rather strong thunderstorms, also caused wind damage. Over 10,000 customers lost power in the afternoon across Connecticut, Rhode Island, and the Massachusetts South Shore. Tree and wire damage was reported across those three states. 2 children, unfortunately, were injured by a falling tree in Johnston, Rhode Island. So that's why I said there were no injuries with the there were no injuries directly tied to the flooding, but there were 2 injuries tied to wind damage with the storms. Now, there were also a few flash flood warnings issued across New Hampshire. Flooding up there this time was to a lesser extent. We kind of have a role reversal of what we had in June, where northern New England just got hammered by the flash flooding. This time it was southern New England that bore the brunt of the flooding. Well, June is now over. Thankfully, I'm sure a lot of people thankful that this June is over. To say it was rainy and cloudy and dreary and cool is really an understatement for New England. Some areas of New England have seen more rain than others this past month. Western areas have generally been drier, while eastern areas generally bore the brunt of the conditions previously mentioned. Maine, naturally being the furthest east, It was quite brutal for much of the month. 22 of 30 days in June saw rain in Portland. 20 days were below average temperature-wise in that city. The whole month averaged just over 3 degrees below average. Portland did not set any kind of rain records this month. In fact, 2019 was actually rainier for that city. Of course, other communities across the state and the region have seen much more rain than Portland in the past month. Large swaths of Maine have seen between 5 and 10 inches of rain. Boston experienced their second cloudiest June on record. Boston averages overcast skies about 35% of the time in June. 2023 was overcast well over 50% of the time, nearly 60%. Boston saw 16 days with below average temperatures, with 6 days in a row in late June failing to make it to 70 degrees. Days of heavy downpours took their toll across the region. Just last week, we went over flash flooding across the region in last week's Weather Wednesday. Nearly a half-foot of rain fell in Andover, Maine, and Alexandria, New Hampshire during that one storm alone. There were multiple storms that dropped several inches of rain across the region over the course of the month. June 17th saw 6 inches of rain fall in Newport, New Hampshire. So there was just day after day of covering flash flood warnings here at New England Storm Center. This is thanks to an extremely persistent and now unseasonable blocking pattern. We've talked about this pattern for a while here at New England Storm Center. It's basically thanks to a blocking high in the North Atlantic, keeping New England in a trough. This allows constant cutoff lows to meander over New England, and with it being a blocking pattern, these low pressures get blocked in, and they can just sit over New England or sit near New England for days on end, cycling these showers and storms through the region. Much of June saw an omega block across the United States. This block has officially broken down, but as long as that blocking high sits in the North Atlantic, this overall pattern will continue. This has allowed the pattern to carry over into July. As discussed before, New England saw some of its worst flash flooding so far this season on the 4th of July. So we do have a brief warm-up to full summer heat coming in for the rest of this week. The entire region actually will soar well into the 80s with some low 90s possible. No one is getting left out of this warm-up this time, unlike the brief warm-up in the middle of June that was contained to northern Maine and Vermont. Humidity will remain elevated, so it will feel very hot out there. Boston, by the way, has not officially hit 90 degrees yet this year. We still have a few weeks to go to get to the all-time latest first 90 in the city, which is July 30th. Boston will get very close over the next few days. Will they get there? It's honestly a toss-up. I mean, whether the city tops out officially at 90 or 89 or 88, we'll just have to wait and see on that front. This past week will likely be very indicative of how July plays out, at least the first half of the month. After about a week straight of daily rain and downpour chances, again, with this pattern in the summer, it's difficult to get a washout. I know this past Sunday was a washout for many in New England, but most days are not washouts. It's rounds of storms and showers with dry times and sometimes even sun in between the storms. But over the past week, we've had daily rain and downpour chances. And now as we get into the middle of the week, we are going to get into some ridging and generally drier weather. In this pattern, there will never be a 0% chance of showers, and some isolated showers and storms could pop up Wednesday, Thursday. Then, as quickly as this ridge built up, it is going to break down, and another wave of low pressure is going to move through for the weekend into early next week. I wrote this a couple times recently in articles, and I think it really explains New England's weather pattern perfectly. I wrote, slow-moving cut-off lows, bringing showers and storms for days on end, with brief ridging in between, allowing drier weather. Again, that's what we are seeing. We are now here in the middle of this week. We are entering the ridging and the drier weather the brief ridging, and then it will break down, and we will start it over again with a slow cutoff low, moving through, bringing showers and storms. So I did put out the July weather outlook recently, and it does look like July will be certainly warmer than June, while it will remain unsettled. The temperatures are looking to run mostly average, again, with these very brief warm ups. That's what I officially wrote, is that I think the month is going to be dominated by average temperatures with brief warm ups. And the big time warm ups will be short lived, as we're seeing with this upcoming one. It's going to warm up, but for about 2.5 to 3 days before we drop back down to average to maybe even slightly below average. And yes, it does look like July will be a fairly unsettled month. I know a lot of people probably don't want to hear that, and I don't like to be the bearer of bad news, especially in my monthly outlooks when people are maybe looking for some hope of this pattern change. It's really not there yet. And as long as that high in the North Atlantic is there, this pattern is going to continue. We will very likely be above average rain-wise through at least mid-July. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Weather Wednesday podcast here at New England Storm Center. So thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and you will hear from me again next Wednesday.